name is Byrd McDaniel, and I'm a third-year PhD student in ethnomusicology, which is kind of like, it's like cultural study of music. I had a friend who, she was like, "Did you know they have air guitar competitions?" And I said, like, "No way, I don't believe you." The choreography was just like so impressive, and it was funny, it was weird, it was like subversive, and there were all these like complicated issues that came to mind when I saw it. And so I was like, this is amazing. Too bad I'll never get to study this. And then I came to Brown and got a grant to go to the World Air Guitar Competition in 2014. And I went there and I was just totally sucked in. And now I've been researching like the history of air guitar and famous air guitarists, famous examples of air guitar performances, and just all of these identity issues related to air guitar competitions. So I drank the Kool-Aid, and here I am. So I sit around and I go to random archives when I'm sitting on my couch, like watching TV or something, and I just search like fake guitar, imaginary instrument, imaginary banjo, all these instruments that might be related to guitar, all these ideas of like fake things, trickery, playing with the sources of sounds that would allow me to get closer to the history of air guitar. Typically people refer to air guitarists as drunk, and I think that connects to the idea that there's some sort of like loss of inhibition, and the idea that there's sort of this just like deep connection with the music that causes one's body to move involuntarily, and you're just like playing because like I can't help it. The music forces me to do it. And I found a lot of examples in the early 20th century and the late 19th century of people where air playing was seen as a sign of mental illness or something. So women with hysteria who would need to be locked away because they played air instruments, or someone who was mesmerized by a mesmerist or like a hypnotist who would play air instruments on stage to the audience's enjoyment. And typically the people who would play these air instruments, who were pathologized in this way, were people of color, women, bodies that were typically deemed kind of non-normative to begin with. That's a really kind of interesting history of air guitar, and there's definitely kind of like a racial dimension in the history of air guitar that I'm still exploring, and a gender dimension, definitely. Air guitar competitions have been going on for a long time, since the 1980s at least, and air guitar is like, as a term, emerges from kind of like punk, rock, and heavy metal genres, and the way that fans would kind of engage with performers in various performance contexts. Like they would sort of like mimic the stars on stage or something like that. And so air bands and air competitions have taken place since then. But there was a competition in 1996 that emerged as part of a music video festival, actually. They kind of became its own entity, known as the Air Guitar World Championships. I followed along a few air guitarists in the US, kind of made friends with them, went to local competitions in Boston at TT the Bear's place, went to the Bowery and saw competitions, went to DC, and traveled all over, went to Kansas City for the national competition. I'd never been to Finland before, but I had gotten funding through grant money to go to the world competition. So I flew to Helsinki, Finland, and I took a midnight train to northern Finland, to Oulu, and there were all these people there who were just fans of air guitar. The air guitarist I was following particularly was Aristotle. So, side note, all air guitarists have really interesting names, kind of like you would in roller derby or something like that. Like roller derby, or maybe even like professional wrestling. You know? So Aristotle is a particularly good air guitarist from the US. Others would be like Nordic Thunder, Windhammer, Rocky Roads, like Kingslayer, various like kind of funny names like that. So Aristotle won New York and made his way to the national competition in Kansas City. And so I went to Kansas City, saw him compete, and he won the national competition. So I was excited because I knew when I traveled to Finland, he would be there. in general, I think there's a huge consensus among a lot of women air guitarists that they're treated differently in the competition than men are. Their bodies are sexualized. Some of them will cross-dress. Some of them will perform in sort of like complicated gender ways to resist that tendency. When I went to the national competition in 2014, there were 3 judges, all of whom were men, and there were competitors, and many of the competitors who were women were identified as women air guitarists. So, but the men wouldn't be identified as men air guitarists, right? So it's like, here's our next air guitarist, Aristotle, and then here's our next woman air guitarist, Kingslayer. Kingslayer competed, and one of the judges' comments kind of indicated, drew attention to the sexuality of the performance, typical. And so the idea is like, can women compete with men on the same terms when their bodies are kind of like inherently sexualized? Should they do the same moves as men? And is there a different kind of gestural vocabulary that women should exhibit? How do they deal with the fact that certain like areas of their body are like kind of eroticized in different ways than areas of men's bodies are eroticized? A lot of air guitarists like get naked. It's like nudity is like a big part of air guitar, I would say. Is the guitar inherently like phallic? Is when we think of air guitar, do we imagine kind of like, you know, jock, male, dude, bro, dorm room, you know, men? Or do we think of kind of like it is an open category to anyone who wants to access it? But in any case, there are a lot of women who take it really seriously and are really incredible at it and are often treated differently and are treated by a different standard. In Risky Business, you see Tom Cruise like deeply lost in the music, right? He's like in his underwear, he's like dancing on the table, he's using a fire poker as like a guitar and a microphone, and is kind of all over the place. And as an audience member, you kind of laugh at him in the same way you'd laugh at other pantomime artists, because you think like, oh, it's so silly, like he's not playing anything, and how, you know, how weird. But you also kind of see that dimension of like deep investment in the music, and you think like, perhaps as a spectator, or at least for me, I think I know what it's like to be so deeply invested in a listening experience that I kind of move too.